Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about a book I just finished reading called Caring for One Another, 8 Ways to Cultivate Meaningful Relationships, written by Ed Welch. Some of you may be familiar with Ed Welch. He works with CCEF, which is a Christian counseling organization, very well known, and this book is put out by Crossway. It was published just a couple of years ago, 2018, and is a very short little study designed to help Christians uh, put into practice the Bible's commands to care for one another. So let me give you kind of an overview of the book, lay out some of its strengths and weaknesses, and give you my thoughts. So as I said, this is a very short book. It's less than 80 pages if you include all the notes and scripture index and all that kind of thing. It's really something that's designed not so much for you to kind of read through as it is to kind of prompt discussions. It's very much a book that's written to be read with other people. That's not to say that you couldn't read through it on your own and find some helpful things, but you'll get the most out of it if you use this not as kind of the end goal, but as something to kind of prompt further discussion and conversation amongst a group of people. So it's really written to be used, I would say, in small groups of people. You could try to adapt this for a Sunday school class, but I think you'd really want a group of probably no more than 4 or 5 people to really talk through it in an in-depth way. Maybe you could do a bit more than that if it was a very relaxed environment like a home study or working with a team or something like that. But it's structured around 8 lessons, and they call them lessons, not chapters, because again, each one is very short in terms of the content that it covers, but it's really trying to introduce or focus in on one aspect of what it means to care for one another. Kind of the impetus for this book, I think, is really 2 things. Number one, Welch is drawing on the fact that the Bible has a lot to say about how we as Christians are to live with and serve and care for one another. You can even just do a word search on that phrase, one another, and you'll find it all throughout the New Testament. It's something that the Bible consistently uses that language to describe what our life together should look like. That being a Christian is never conceived of as a kind of individualistic, private, personal matter that's disconnected from community. We're redeemed to be part of God's people. We're saved to be part of Christ's church. That membership is essential to who we are, that we are members of one another, members of the body of Christ. And therefore we love one another, we care for one another, we serve one another, we rebuke one another, we encourage one another. Again, all throughout the Bible, you'll find that language running through. So I think Welch is trying to remind us of that fact that the Bible has a lot to say about how we live with one another. I think what Welch is also sensitive to is that while we might, even when we know that fact, a lot of people struggle with putting feet on that. What does it actually look like? If I say love one another, care for one another, well, how do I do that, right? Especially when it's people who are, in my church, but maybe I'm not, they're not part of my family, or I don't work with them day to day, or I don't see them all the time. How do you actually pursue and cultivate the kind of community and love and care that the Bible calls us to, but that so much in our culture militates against, right? If we have Christian communities that rarely are involved in each other's lives, if being part of the church just means, we gather in one place and we sit through a service together, if that's all that we're experiencing, and so many churches increasingly are emphasizing that part of the church, especially as you get large churches. Not all large churches do this, right? There's some very faithful large churches, but the temptation can be that the professionals, the staff, the pastor, the musicians, they're going to put on a show. We're going to gather and watch the show and learn some lessons and then go back and do our private lives. And what's missing in that is the community. It's the one another is missing, and there isn't meaningful connection. And so I think what Welch is trying to do is to remind us of those biblical commands and then help us to work that out on the ground. What does it look like to actually pursue and cultivate relationships with one another? And he lays out 8 ways we can do that, 8 lessons. I'll just read the titles of these lessons. This is the table of contents, gives you a flavor for where he's going. So he talks about caring for one another with all humility. He talks about moving towards others. How do you do that? How do you build those connections when they maybe aren't there to begin with? He talks about in lesson 3, knowing the heart, getting beneath the kind of, hey, how was your week, to the actual things people are wrestling with. And connected with that, knowing the critical influences, knowing the things that that person is responding to in their circumstances, the counsel or voices that they're receiving. How do you kind of uncover those things and talk to people about those things? Lesson 5 is be personal and pray. So it talks about that. How do you make those real connections? How do you pray for one another? Lesson 6 is talking about suffering. Lesson 7 is talking about sin. And lesson 8 is remember and reflect, which is in a sense kind of wrapping up a lot of what is included. And with each of those short lessons, what Welch will do is usually at the front end, he'll have like a little paragraph which is summarizing what this lesson is about. He'll have a few pages and it's helpfully kind of got headings and marked it off. And then he'll end every lesson with discussion and response. 2, 3, 4 questions that are designed to get you working out what the material was talking about in your own context. Occasionally he'll have diagrams and things as part of the book, but each lesson is really maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of content, and then a couple pages of discussion, all very short, all very bite-sized, all very focused, but very helpful. So I just finished reading through this with my elders at my church. We go through books together as part of our session meetings, and we just went through this. We only meet once a month, so we went through 2 chapters at a time, or 2 lessons at a time, which still moved us through at a decent pace and didn't seem like too much to talk about or handle. If you were meeting with a small group of people, once a week, you could do a lesson a week. You could also group up, as I said, and go through it in 3 or 4 meetings, something like that. But it is a good prompt to get you thinking and talking about how do we actually connect with people, invest in people, pray for people, go beyond the surface, how was your week, how's the weather kind of conversations. So I think this is a book, a resource that could be helpful for Christians as a whole. It could be helpful for, as we went through as Christian leaders, we're trying to shepherd people. How do you make those connections? How do you have those conversations? And he does get very practical. He gives you, ideas of, when sin comes to the surface, what do you say? How do you respond to someone? How do you initiate a conversation when you're aware of maybe a struggle, or you have concerns that there might be a struggle? How do you bring that up? And so for those who are wrestling with those very practical things, this book will give some helpful guides. In many ways, it's very basic, and they kind of say that, there shouldn't be anything really, really new here. Although I will say, working with people, some people, especially if they haven't grown up in the church or haven't grown up in an environment where there are healthy relationships, some people really struggle, especially in our day and age where there's so much dysfunction in the family, so much disconnection from one another. A lot of people struggle with things that maybe in the past would have been seen as basic, but just how do you start a conversation? How do you go deeper? How do you talk about struggles? And so this is a book that might be more and more necessary as our culture wrestles more and more with just the basics of how do you have relationships with people, right? But then especially how do you have Christian relationships with people? How do you view people and talk to them? This book will have some helpful things to say. So it could definitely be worth going through with kind of teen age and up. You could do it in a Sunday school if you have if it's a small setting. I think a small group would be ideal. Or if you're college, you want to go through it with your dorm or your wing or something. You could go through it, one-on-one discipleship kind of thing. I think you'd get the best if you have at least 3 people in the group, probably no more than like 10 people in the group. That would be my sense of things. But it's good grist for the mill to get us thinking and talking about what it looks like, what it means, and how we can be involved in caring for one another. So overall, I would recommend for anyone who is looking to talk through those things more, picking up this book, Caring for One Another by Ed Welch.